Welcome. Professor Krishnamurti has briefly mentioned about his experience with many Nadi readers in his book, The Third Reader. When I was reading that particular paragraph, then this statement from the professor is what caught my attention. The professor mentions that I understood that without assigning the reason, the results were read and they were astoundingly meticulously correct. Now, this is something that I found very fascinating since this statement was coming from no other than the Professor Krishnamurti himself, and this is what attracted me toward the Nadi astrology and the Nadi readers. I have been reading about the Nadi stuff off and on for many years, and no doubt there's something quite mysterious about it. Now, in recent years, it appears that more Nadi reading centers have opened. It sounds like a franchisee model is coming up in place. So I decided to share a few more things from Professor Krishnamurti on Nadi and the Nadi reader. So I'll come to this part later because this part is something very important and that I would definitely like to discuss. But let's first look at the Professor's Krishnamurti's experience with a Nadi reader in Varanasi that he has mentioned in his magazine Astrology and Adrist, for which Sri KSK served as the publisher and also the editor. Professor Krishnamurti met this Nadi astrologer in 1964. So you see, that's almost like 60 years. So 60 years ago, he met this astrologer in Varanasi. Professor Krishnamurti has mentioned that through one of his relatives who have been living in Varanasi for a very long time, so through his contact, he was able to identify a Nadi astrologer in Varanasi. Another thing Professor Krishnamurti is mentioned is about his limited Hindi speaking skills. Professor was able to understand the Hindi, but he was not able to speak in Hindi. So he has mentioned that he took the help of an engineering student from BHU, the Banaras Hindu University, and the student name was Venkat Raman. The Venkat Raman's task was to translate the or become the translator between Professor Krishnamurti and the Nadi reader of the Banaras. Now, usually what I understand is that to locate or identify a person's chart, the thumb impression is taken. And then there seems to be some secretive process through which a person's horoscope is identified. But this didn't happen in this particular meeting between KSK and the Nadi reader. The Professor Krishnamurti mentioned that he has to provide the date, time and place. All three were given to the Nadi reader. And after that, the Nadi reader disappeared in a small room. And then he came back after some time. And let me put in Sri Krishnamurti's own words what happened when that Nadi reader came back after a few minutes. So the professor mentioned that 7 minutes passed. He means the Nadi reader. Nadi reader came out with a small file pinned with a gem clip. It looked as though the bunch of papers were fumigated. Now this fumigation, I checked on the internet and realized that fumigation is also a technique where when you want to give a fake antique vintage kind of a look to some document or paper, then this particular technique is used. So the professor has mentioned that this bunch of papers look like they were fumigated. I means professor. So KSK asked him, is this mine? And is this the original? This question is important, where Krishnamurti is asking the astrologer that was he able to identify the Krishnamurti's horoscope in his archive in that room, and whatever that Nadi reader is holding, that bunch of paper, are those the original, or it's like some kind of a copy that he has made? So the astrologer replied that that indeed that were Professor Krishnamurti's horoscope, and they were the original. The Nadi reader started making a lot of assessment of Professor Krishnamurti's horoscope. That professor has mentioned as some general statements. And obviously this whole conversation was being translated by Mr. Venkatraman. Now, a couple of very interesting things that professor has mentioned. And then I'm going to quote from that article. This is what the Nadi reader mentioned about Professor Krishnamurti's father. So he said your father would have had difficulties occasionally and on some occasions success. Your mother did not live long. Your business was good in some years, and mind you, some years it might have caused you anxiety. Now you see how general, very average kind of statement these are, and you say this to anyone, and this will fit all. So that is why Professor Krishnamurti has mentioned that some general statement about his parents and business were given by the Nadi reader. And now professor himself has mentioned for the readers. He has put this as a remark, and let me put this also. This is from KSK. And KSK has mentioned this thing in this, especially keeping this particular statement from the Nadi reader in mind, where he is mentioning that your business means Sri KSK's business was good in some years. Now KSK is, Professor Krishnamurti is mentioning what exactly was his career or profession throughout his life until he started dedicating all his time to his magazine and astrology books, things like that. So before that, he was a government pensioner, and then he was visiting panchayat boards, jails, hospitals, and so he was kind of I think he was a inspector of various government facilities. So that is what he was doing. So this was not a business. And then professor has mentioned that he had no business. For 40 years, he just was a public or the government servant. So this is what Professor Krishnamurti has mentioned for the readers in response to this particular prediction by the Nadi reader. See, it's not easy to predict whether a person will go in the business or in the service or in both. And the way some of the Nadi readings or some of the Nadi granths have been popularized, that they tell everything, that whether the person will be in service or business. So I think in that background, you should look at this particular comment from the professor. The about Professor KSK's marriage, the Nadi reader said, you would have been married before 27 years of your age. Now this is the marriage prediction is something that many people who have visited Nadi Center, they claim that it is always a bullseye, and the date of marriage, especially if the marriage has already happened, if it has already become a past event, then the Nadi readings are very precise and accurate. So obviously the one of the question was about the marriage, and the Nadi reader mentioned you would have been married before 27 years of your age. And let's look at what actually happened. So Professor Krishnamurti has mentioned, I interrupted. I told him that I got married when I was 22 years old. So he means the Nadi reader. So he said, right, 22 is within 27. So this is quite amusing that professor got married at the age of 22 years. But the Nadi reading made by that particular astrologer mentioned that he was unable to make a precise identification of year, and this is just a very general statement that he got married before 27 years of his age. Professor Krishnamurti was able to inspect the astrologer's collection of nadi leaves and paper related to his horoscope. And he has mentioned that his doubt about the authenticity of those nadi leaves and paper were correct. The paper containing KSK's horoscope had not been fumigated. See, this is important, where professor is mentioning that the Nadi reader was holding a bunch of papers in his hands, and most of the papers were already fumigated. They were looking old, vintage, genuine Nadi leaf kind of a look were there, except for one paper that had the professor's horoscope. Because like I mentioned in the beginning, that the Nadi astrologer was not able to identify he did not take the thumb impression. He actually collected the date, time, place, and went inside a room and then came back saying that he was able to find the horoscope. But the thing is that he went inside and he actually generated the horoscope in a non-fumigated paper. Why non-fumigated paper? Because Krishnamurti has mentioned that it is not, you can't write on a fumigated or a paper that's already treated with chemicals or some smoke process. You can't possibly write in it. So in that bunch of palm leaves that this astrologer was holding, so that KSK's horoscope was on a non-fumigated paper. So at the end of this whole Nadi reading session, KSK's impression was not very positive. And he has mentioned that before leaving, he did ask that if he has to pay for this consulting. And I think the professor was quite annoyed. He has mentioned that I loudly spoke that should I pay for this, and the astrologer said no, you just go away from here. So that was the impression that the Professor Krishnamurti had at the end of the Nadi session. Professor Krishnamurti has shared this particular experience in his magazine, The Astrology and Adrist. And as a final concluding remark, what he has mentioned is for the reader is worth looking into. So he has mentioned as Astrology and Adrist, that was his magazine, is to give correct scientific approach to the subject, to make all honest attempt to offer accurate predictions, to assist the reader, and to put an end to bluffers. You see, he has mentioned about to put an end to bluffers and also cheats. For this reason, he has shared this particular experience with the Nadi reader. So that's what he mentioned, that I will fail in my duty if I do not publish this. So overall, Krishnamurti's experience I think with many Nadi readers, his experience has not been good. Because somewhere else he has also mentioned that that from my experience in the past 38 years, this is what professor is mentioning. Though I am 58 years of age, now I can boldly say that there may be 10% of genuine Nadi written in palm leaves in old script. Somewhere I was reading, professor has mentioned that there are Nadi readers that they produce horoscope that are written in Devanagari script and on a modern piece of paper. So here Professor Krishnamurti is mentioning that I can boldly say that there may be 10% of genuine Nadi readers written in palm leaves in old script. What is the old script? This is not the modern Tamil script. It is an old Tamil script. So that is what professor is mentioning. Now, one more thing about this comment is, see, this whole Nadi session happened, like I mentioned, 60 years ago. So at that time, if Professor Krishnamurti has mentioned that only 10% of genuine Nadi readers, so I don't know what is the state of current affairs, but professor has given some advice for for people who are enthusiastic about getting a Nadi reading. So professor has given some advice and tips. So let's look at that. Now he has mentioned that genuine and original Nadis cannot be found written in paper. Krishnamurti's advice to the Nadi reading enthusiast. A lot of these Nadi centers have popped up. So let's look at some of these advice. The genuine and original Nadis cannot be found written in paper. See whether the horoscope is written only at that time or whether it appears to be as old as the other sheets of paper. So I already explained this when KSK was having a session with that Nadi reader. Then another important point that KSK has mentioned is that whenever you consult the Nadi, ask him to take your leaves means the palm leaves, on the same day when you visit. Do not give time for him to inquire. See, this is something important. What Professor Krishnamurti is trying to say is that when you visit a Nadi center, then they might take your thumb impression, and then they might say that you can come the next day because they have to search for your horoscope in their library or the archive. So professor is saying don't give that much of time to them. Why? Because they will use that time to figure out about you. And the next day when you visit them, then they already have some information about your life. See, all these things are okay, but I think, I mean, I would say that professor has a good intention in offering these explanation, but the whole fraudulent practice in the Nadi reading has reached such a level of perfection that all this is a child's play. To dodge all these things for a fraudulent Nadi reader is just a child's play. Now, when professor mentions about the palm leaves and things like that, so I was just making a search and I realized that the hand-drawn palm leaf paper. Now these are already available on the eBay, and the the antique looking vintage paper. So those are also available on Amazon. So all these the palm leaf pseudo, I would say, or a fake palm leaf or the antique paper, they are already available on the Amazon, and they're not very costly also, and you pay them a few bucks more and you can get the same day delivery also. Another thing is that when professor mentions about they do not give time and ask to take your leaves on the same day. Now these days it is so easy to harvest the information from social media profile. How difficult it is. I mean, if I know your name, a few things about you before you are visiting me, I can very easily harvest all kind of information from your social media profile. So I don't think these advices, though in a good intention, you cannot just dodge them. So these advices are okay, but the fraudulent practices are far more sophisticated. The Nadi Granth or the Nadi leaves, apart from carrying person's horoscope, also carry a lot of information about some principles of Jyotish or the astrology. So those are also there on the palm leaves or the Nadi leaves, and that is more academic. And I did a video long back in which I covered some of those I think sutra and the yogas as mentioned in the Nadi astrology. And I would like to mention one person's contribution, and that is CS Patel. If you can get hold of his book Nadi astrology, you can see this the green cover image over here. So if you can get hold of this book, that book gives a very good, authentic and valuable information on the Jyotish aspect of the Nadi Granth. And I would highly recommend you to read that book. And the link to this particular video I am going to put in the description. The stalwarts in astrology like Professor Krishnamurti and B.V. Raman, they have mentioned about the accurate birth chart that exists in genuine Nadi centers. Now this fact alone, if this is a fact, then this fact alone has a lot of weight. And I have always wondered that why this cannot be used to identify individuals whose ascendant is on borderline. Now let's say somebody is born with an ascendant Virgo, let's say 29 degree 59 minute and maybe 58 seconds. So this is a borderline. So we come across a lot of the horoscope where a ascendant or even planet might be on the borderline. And this is where the Einansh issue kicks in. So I have always wondered that what happens when a person visits a nadi center and there the ascendant is uh, found to be not Virgo but Libra. Does it not help in solving the Einansha issue as well? I don't know if anybody has thought about it or given some thought towards it. But if the Nadi horoscopes are very accurate, then this could be used to solve the Einansh issue. This can also be, in some ways, this could also address the Cyan versus Nerian. If the Nadi horoscope generated from the thumb impression is a Nerian, or what we call as a Vedic horoscope, then that itself is something that we might want to think at between the Cyan and the Nerian, and then at the same time the Einansha controversy. There are some set of videos discussing about the past and the future life based on Nadi reading or on the Nadi Shastra. Of course, I have no interest in that, but I was given some reading based on some Nadi Shastra which I don't know. And according to that, in one of my previous births, I was a cow, and then in another birth, I was a crow. So, and then for the future, the next life, I have been predicted that I'm going to be born as a South Indian woman. So I'm not sure what's going to happen, but these kind of things are also there in the name of the Nadi Granth or the Nadi reading. So do share your experience, and only the genuine experience. If you really had some genuine experience, or if you have really some profound questions around this whole school of nadi-leaves and the Nadi Granth, then you can mention that in the comment. I would love to hear from you. That's all in this video. Thanks for watching.